Finding one zero day and getting paid for it multiple times sounds like a really good deal. And as much as I can find a bug, I can find a zero day, I have no idea how to scale bugs and I have no automations that scan many bug bounty programs. But in this episode of Bug Bounty Reports Discussed podcast, I will interview Michael Ness, who has a big automation scanning the internet looking for zero days and other bugs that can be automated. Enjoy the interview. Hello, Michael. Thank you so much for joining me. How did you get to the point you are currently at? Start wherever you want to start.
Hi, thank you very much for having me on the podcast. It's a pleasure. And I'll just jump right in at the start. So for me, I started Bug Bounty probably about two and a half years ago now. And I wasn't actually working in cybersecurity or anything like that. I was kind of just learning and doing freelance penetration testing. And that kind of got me online with some bug bounty programs. And I started from there, pretty much using bug bounty to try and get experience and understand different technical aspects and then try and land a job within the industry. So that was kind of how I got there. I spent a year working in application security for a fintech company down in London. And now I work for a data security company with this LA-based focusing on essentially finding sensitive data within, cloud environments. And that's pretty much where I'm at today and continue with the bug bounty as part-time and really enjoying it.
How did you start doing freelance pen tests?
So I was always interested in web security, coming from more a game background where I used to do development on some really small games and to learn how to program essentially. So the first language I ever learned to write code in was Java. I'd done it very, very poorly, but this kind of led into how stuff interacts with the web. So within these games, you have things that, web services like buying from a store, for instance, to get in-game items. And you have to write the interactions between the web part and the in-game. And, looking at things like the payment system, how you validate a transaction and how games were essentially, given items based on transactions across this was something I was really interested in. So a lot of the first bugs I found were in these kind of payment systems for games and stuff like that. And then I realized that, this is maybe more common where you can look at different web issues. So I kind of done the standard stuff and start looking at the OWASP top 10 and then trying to see if I could reach out to people who had small, exposures, whether this be data exposures or small vulnerabilities that were very obvious on the web applications. And, just essentially go to them in good faith and ask if they would like a pen test. And that's very much how I got started, about 10 or so clients and just doing it through that. So it wasn't actually exploiting vulnerabilities. It was more finding exposed data and S3 buckets and things like that. And then trying to follow up and get a pen test out of that was how I got started, really.
That's really interesting. So you found bugs in companies that you were you weren't expecting immediate results, but you landed pen tests because you reported those bugs. Is this right?
Yeah. So that was pretty much it. A large part was finding things in cloud misconfigurations. So I think the first ever pen test I got, I found a backup of a database in an S3 bucket using Grey Hat Warfare actually. And I kind of contacted the company and just responsibly disclosed this. And they followed up with me and asked if I would like to do a pen test on, their actual main web application and, what was the rates and things like that. So at this point, I knew nothing, really nothing. I had the knowledge of the OWASP top 10 and that was kind of what I went on. So I came back with a really low fee and went through the web application and found some vulnerabilities off the back of that. But that was really how I got started, kind of just winging it through and a bit of luck.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Good takeaway for people who find bugs in companies that don't have bug bounty programs and they immediately want to get paid for those bugs, even they want to get paid before they disclose the bugs. So the way you did it is actually really, really interesting to me. Didn't expect that it's even possible. So really nice. And how did you then transition to what you're doing now, to more cloud-based stuff?
So kind of always going back to where it started, I found out that, if you can find something within an S3 bucket or something that's not necessarily hard to find or requires a lot of technical ability, then it can provide opportunities, as you said, through the connections with the companies. So I've always been kind of fascinated with that, and that was how I actually got started in bug bounty, as well as some of these findings that I had through Grey Hat had bug bounty programs that I just didn't know about. So, I'd spend maybe a week online to the customer chat trying to get up to the security team, and eventually you would get invited to a private program and get some bounties through the program. So that happened on BugCrowd on 2 occasions. I was invited to private companies and paid through that, which was really nice. And then I was always fascinated with this. So I worked in application security. That was the very first thing. And I always wanted to be more cloud-based. Although they were cloud everything, I wanted to work in data security, specifically around S3 and stuff like that. So the company I work at just now characterize sensitive data at scale. So, anything from hundreds of gigabytes up to terabytes of data. And we'll tell you if, there's personal information in there, if there's social security numbers, different things like that. So I do security research around this, to try and find new interesting things to include in the product, pretty much. That's the best summary I can give there.
And what would you say are the biggest differences between being an AppSec engineer and probably doing pen tests, if you did this, and bug bounty?
Yeah, so for I'll start with the pen test. I mean, for me, I was just sort of starting out, and I've had more exposure to this recently, with hiring in third parties to do pen tests and doing things through BugCrowd and their pen test programs. But really, for me, the pen test was all about coverage. So you making sure you cover everything and making sure you test everything and making sure you've ticked everything off a list, really, in that sense. And then once you've done that coverage, you can dive a bit deeper and do things. But they're interested in, in identifying potentials and the reporting aspect of things. It's really important to cover everything. Application security is a little different. In the role I was in, there wasn't much necessarily me going out and testing applications. It was more on the other side of how the applications are built. So I was doing some code review, making sure the pipelines to build and deploy the code were secure, and a few different things. So really, it's not necessarily blue team, but you're looking from the other side. You're trying to make sure that SQL injections and cross-site scripting bugs don't get to production. They're caught in pipelines or they're caught beforehand. And you spend a lot of time actively working with developers and trying to educate them on the risks associated with these different types of bugs, how to identify them and what to do to fix them in that sense. So bug bounty is a little bit different. I think having a pen testing background is great, and also having a bit of the other side is great, because really if you can sit and break down a technology or an application and understand how it works from, how the code is shipped to production, to then have an understanding of its intended functionality, you can really kind of look along the line of saying, is there any exposed like platforms for building the code, like Jenkins and stuff like that? Is there any bugs within the code? You can kind of build this whole picture. So although they were completely different, it's given me that kind of full stack thing where you can understand how applications are built and you can understand how to break them, if that makes sense.
Do you think it would be easier to start bug bounty after being an AppSec engineer or a pen tester, or the other way around?
I think for me, probably a pen tester, because and you have experience using Burp Suite, you know how to break things. I think that is probably the best basis. You don't necessarily have to understand how an application is built to break it. It helps when it gets to complicated situations, but I would definitely say pen tester, and it probably gives you a better line of practical skills to then move into bug bounty.
So let's assume I am a pen tester. I have a solid background of web security. I can do pen tests. I know a lot of vulnerability types, but I've never did bug bounty. How would you recommend me to start?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So the best place to start really is looking at resources around bug bounty. So there's some great creators. Obviously yourself, you've got things like AppSec who provide context around what bug bounty is and what different things are. Probably the finding what you really like hacking is probably the best advice I could give. You have wide scope programs that allow a bunch of assets or everything owned by the company. You have really small applications that, you need to go deep in. So understanding what you enjoyed as part of your job is probably the best advice I could give, because what you enjoy doing is generally what you're going to be better at. And then learning the skills that go along with it. So when we talk about recon, you talk about it, it's completely different from a wide scope to a small scope application. Understanding things that you might not necessarily be looking for in a pen test, like trying to read, things like JavaScript files as part of small application recon, and then large application recon doing this thing, trying to find assets that belong to the company that maybe no one else has found in that sense. So a bit of a long-winded answer, but I think the most important thing is understanding the bug bounty space, how it differs slightly from pen testing, and understanding what you really like doing from your pen testing background, and persistence, obviously, because there's probably 3-4 months where you're not going to find anything, sometimes even longer. But I mean, if you stick with something, you've got a higher chance of finding something than just switching about all the time.
So how do you like to hunt?
So for me personally, I don't do any deep diving. A lot of my stuff is automated, so it's very much spending time writing code to do things that I do over time and time again. A large part of what I like to find is subdomain takeovers. That has probably made up the largest proportion of the bounties that I've received. And other things is automating bugs like cross-site scripting. For instance, that's one of the things I like to do and scan for. So a large part of my hunting involves just running recon, 24/7, and finding new assets and then scanning these for vulnerabilities, like cross-site scripting, for instance, and then looking at the configuration of their DNS and trying to find anything that's misconfigured there. So it's pretty much just like a 24/7 scanner that just keeps going round and round until it finds new things. Is how I hunt, and I spend most of my time updating that and making sure it's constantly looking for new things or not breaking.
I imagine for bugs like subdomain takeovers, it's very natural to automate these bugs. So I imagine there is a lot of competition. So how do you make sure that you are the first one to report the bug?
So a lot of it goes into the recon. Is everyone's hunting the same programs. They're trying to grab it as fast as they can. So there's kind of two parts to it. It's trying to find things that other people don't have. So subdomains that other people don't have is a big one. Or trying to be first on a new private program, for instance. You can often, if you get a new invite to a new private program, it can often be a gold mine if you're lucky enough. And also the speed of your code. So ensuring that your code's looping as fast as possible and things are working as efficiently as possible. But it's difficult. There'll be things you'll get an alert for a subdomain takeover. It's very common for S3 buckets, for instance, where you could identify it and it's got a cooldown period. So everyone's trying to brute force to, win the S3 bucket. So it is difficult, but the real thing is code optimization, which is pretty boring, and making sure you can find assets that no one else has, for instance. Everyone's using the same method. So, one small tweak, you can get different results, which is nice.
Do you also have some automations to report bugs or at least generate reports?
So, yeah, I've spent some time, writing report templates. So when I do find a bug case or whatever, I'll output the report in Slack to me, for example. So if it's a subdomain takeover, it'll just send me a generic template with the subdomain and the type of takeover it is to Slack. So it's really just validating that I have successfully taken it over and then reporting it on HackerOne. It's not a case of submitting automated reports. So you still have to go through that triage process and copy and paste in the report, but it's not as bad as manually typing out everything.
How does this work under the hood? What technology do you use to generate the report?
So for me, it's just I've got literally a bunch of strings. I use Go for most of my stuff, so it's just a bunch of strings, and the strings are formatted based on the bug. So I have like a generic S3 template takeover, and it'll just format that string with the appropriate subdomain, and then send it to Slack via a webhook. So nothing advanced. It's just me writing out a report that I've wrote time and time again and formatting it with the appropriate values. Yeah.
As long as it works, it's the good solution. So for subdomain takeover, it's quite obvious how to automate this. But you also said about XSS. do you have like a list of generic XSS payloads, or do you rather find a 0 day somewhere and report it to many companies?
Yeah, so there's kind of two parts to this. It's the first part is, rather than the generic XSS payloads, I try and just break the context. So when you're looking at HTML, there's certain characters within inputs that you're looking for to break context and see if you've got text injection essentially. So really, I'm not looking for cross-site scripting. I'm just looking for HTML injection, and then I'll manually try and escalate it to a cross-site scripting bug. This often avoids you getting blocked by like web application firewalls or different things. So it's essentially just taking found paths or file paths or paths of different things and substituting out parameters for these essentially payloads that are meant to break context. And if context has been broken, then I'll report this to Slack and then go and manually follow up and validate.
So the automation just sends a generic payload. I'm not sure if I understand it with, I don't know, H2 tag or something like this.
So so it just looks to break out existing tags. So if you can imagine, if you've got an input field with the type hidden, for example, and you know that there's something reflected in there, if you can break it with a apostrophe and like a closed triangle bracket, then you could type in a random sequence of characters. So it could, for me, I use XXYZ, and I know if XXYZ is reflected out with this, then if the characters are reflected with XXYZ, then it is broke context, for example, because a lot of things will try and HTML encode them, or they'll try and URL encode them. So if the characters are rendered as they should be, then often or not it's broke context.
And then you get a ping on Slack. How many of such pings do you get, let's say, per week?
So the way I do it is, a lot of endpoints can have similar things. So it could be like multiple parameters on one endpoint. But generally in a week, it's anywhere from probably about 5 to 15 different pings. I mean, some of them I can't break context or can't escalate them to cross-site scripting, but a lot of them, you're bearing in mind, are on main scope web applications. So XSS is very, 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 very much still there. It's just sometimes hard to escalate it. I really hate web application firewalls and spending time trying to do that. That's what kills me.
That's, let's say, 5-15 pings per how many targets do you monitor approximately?
So in the database I have just now, I think I've probably got about close to 5,000 different root domains. So a good number.
That's
so the signal to noise ratio is quite low. But things are changing, so you'll get things hit, one day, and then you'll constantly see new things. So whether that's I just didn't have the path before, or they've made some changes to the code that's allowed this, no idea.
I also saw that you do report some 0 days.
Yeah.
How does that usually look like?
So for me, I'm just going to say it is I'm not skilled enough to sit down and look at code and break down some of these ridiculous 0 days that come out. But what I like doing is building relationships with the people that can find them and offering to find targets for them. It could be quite complimentary. So I have a lot of good friends formed through the relationships of just scanning for different things. So often or not, is the way I'll go. Someone will come to me and ask if I can scan for a specific type of 0 day, and we'll sit down and they'll explain what the software is, how I can fingerprint it, and then I'll go away and generate some fingerprints and essentially go out and identify these targets for them. And I'll just out of trust send them a list of the targets that they're responsible for, and they'll validate which ones are vulnerable or not. And often or not, we'll come back if there's some privates that I have, I'll report the privates, they'll report the public, and we'll try and split it as evenly as possible is the idea. So really they've done a lot of the hard work identifying the 0 day, and I've got this big index, so I'm more than happy to help find any targets that could be exploited in.
Is it always a 50-50 split?
In most cases, it's a 50-50 split. What the researchers that find the 0 days will often go and use resources that are out there first. So they'll go and have a look on Shodan, for example, and try and find whatever they can. And, they might even ask multiple people to scan for it and identify it in most cases. So anything that they can't find on their own is often a 50-50 split. So it's quite nice in that way.
Yeah, I did a similar thing recently, and I also wanted I found a 0 day, and I wanted to first report it to companies from
Yeah.
targets from Shodan, but I had to look for targets that didn't have content security policy. So I wrote a quick script to filter those, and later I wrote to one of people like you that do the automations, and he found one target that was on my list, but my script didn't catch it.
Yeah.
And turned out that my bad regex caught content security policy report only.
Yeah.
Because I written it badly, but yeah, we reported it together, so never mind.
It's always a nice collaboration, and that's the thing. Everyone does something differently, so that's the point. I mean, the amount of bugs that are probably in some of the stuff I do that avoids me catching other things, and the same to other people. So it's nice when you can work with someone else and kind of realize if you've made a mistake or fix something that's happened to me so many times as well.
Yeah, tell me some story of a nice nice fuck up you did. I'm interested.
So there are different types of this is even today, for instance. I've just realized something that I'd done before I came on here is I one of the types of takeovers I look for are essentially authoritative name server takeovers. So when someone deletes a hosted zone, and you can detect if it serve fails, and then you can try and take over that zone. So this was something that worked for me. I would get usually one or two hits a week, and from I've wondered why it's not been working the last few weeks. And the code still checks for it. I just don't store it or send any alerts anymore for whatever reason. So I've removed that piece of code. No idea how, but stuff like this happens, quite often, where you've got a lot of code everywhere and you're trying to change things and make things better, and often or not you leave pieces out. So that was one thing for me. I just completely commented out the code that sent the alerts for it for I don't know what reason. But yeah, that's my latest fuck up.
How many approximately lines of code do you have in your automation?
That's a very, very, very good question. I have, there's a bunch of different, so the way mine's is built is if there's something does like a particular action, it's written as like a microservice, so that'll run like standalone. And I probably have about 30 or so microservices that do different things. So I think probably if you take each one of these, about 200, 300 lines of code on average. I don't even want to work it out, but a lot pretty much.
Yeah, but 10,000, something like this. Is this a good number?
Yeah, probably well over 10,000.
Generally a lot.
Yeah, generally a lot. It's something I've been wanting to know and work out, sit down and work out. I've been trying to make things better and not use as much code, but things are messy sometimes, and there's a lot of it there.
Yeah, coming back to those 0 days, I saw that you also report a lot of them in WordPress websites. I see a lot of scope tables mention that WordPress is out of scope. Do you report those 0 days to those companies anyway?
The thing for me is the scope is a lot of people will probably disagree with this point, and I know a lot of people that agree with it. Is scope is great to there for a guideline, and you've got to take things into consideration. For me, it's all about severity. So if there's an out of scope asset, but there's a remote command execution on it, for instance, then I assume that the company will want to know about it, and so I will still report it. And if it gets NA'd or they don't reward, then I won't complain. But often or not, these companies are some of these companies take it the right way, and they're offer to pay you and happy for like you helping out essentially. So I had one story with one of the WordPress vulnerabilities where their blog was specifically listed as out of scope, and I still received I think it was a $2,500 bounty for an out of scope asset. They just downgraded it to a P2 rather than a P1. And they were kind of, happy it was reported, and they stopped using the plugin altogether after that because they were a bit spooked.
Yeah. I also have mixed experiences with this. But the way I look at it these days is that out of scope means don't test there. But if I already come with a bug and I didn't test it on your website, then it's worth to report it. But I imagine that some companies reject it anyway. Would you try to provide guesstimate of how many companies accept and how many don't?
So I would probably say, in my experience, about 20 to 25% are happy to accept, and they'll either lower the reward or, sometimes it's a really low reward for an out of scope asset. A large proportion of companies are, you shouldn't have reported this, it's out of scope, and, NA it or whatever that may be. But the companies that, do kind of try and make a list of these, and, if you find something that from a company, that's not going to accept that, you just turn it away and don't ever look at it again. And if you do find a company that is known to accept it, I'll just keep reporting the issues to that one particular company, for example. So a small amount, but you can find a good few programs that are happy and respectful to work with for out of scope issues if you do find anything.
Yeah, I saw quite recently bug in one of the, I think, Cloudflare or something like this, responsible for a very big portion of the internet, and a really severe bug. And the blog post said like NA, but then they got like 30K from PayPal. So
Yeah.
So it was worth all the NAs just to get this one bigger payout.
Yeah, that's what I mean. A lot of the companies that do appreciate the out of scope stuff, they do make up for the companies that, as you say, the NA or don't accept it. That's a perfect example. A bug is maybe not valuable to the company that's actually responsible for securing some of the internet, but it's like, to PayPal, it's very serious and they're happy to pay for it.
When you have a bug like this, I guess from what you told, you are not the original, the person who found the bug, but do you also report it to the vendor, or do you rely on those customers to report it to the vendor?
So usually when people come to me, it's a mixed bag. A lot of them have, responsibly disclosed it to the vendor. Some people like to wait until, the patch is available before any scanning commences, just to ensure that, there's an option for companies to patch it. Some people like to report it to the vendor and then just scan immediately and do the reporting. So most of the cases that come to me, they're already reported to the vendor and known issues. There maybe not be a patch released, but in most cases there is not, probably, I would say. They like to get the scanning before there's a patch and see if companies will pay or not. And in the other case, people do often wait for a patch as well. But that's about this thing. Most of I've not experienced a researcher that's not disclosed it responsibly before, going on to scan or anything like that, because I can imagine that might get a bit messy.
Yeah. If you would find a blind XSS in a WordPress plugin, and you would identify that a target uses that plugin in the vulnerable version, do you report the blind XSS straight away, or do you wait for the ping back from XSS Hunter or whatever else?
So for me, I'm a big believer in, there's got to be some impact. So if I submit something, if I know the vulnerability exists and I can match the versions, like often in the case that's not enough. I would always, wait or try and submit like the proof of concept and wait for a ping back and then report it to the company if there is any impact. That's just generally the way I like to do things. In my experience, trying to report things based off, mismatched matched versions never really ends up well. They just say, well, what can you actually do with it, and can you prove any impact?
Yeah, that's true. Do you have something specific for keeping track of what companies did you report the bug or something like this, or it's not such a big scale that you need things like that?
I probably need to start thinking about that. There's been some cases where I've reported the same subdomain takeover twice and, get NA'd because they're saying, please don't submit your same report. It's just, companies, especially with subdomain takeovers, they don't fix things quickly. So if you report it and then release whatever it is you've captured, you essentially can end up reporting the same thing again. But I've just got a big history within Slack, so if I get a finding, I'll just generally, Control F and search Slack to see if it's existed before. Nothing advanced. That's about as far as it goes, and I've started doing that more often now.
Okay, from my perspective, I'm much more likely to be the person finding the 0 day and collaborate with you to scale the bug. What are your tips for people like me? What things make your work easier?
Is known. So when you come to finding anything like this, there's kind of two steps. Obviously the bug works and you have a valid target or something that you've found it on and you've exploited it on. So being able to provide the example of not necessarily like I'm not interested in having the exploit. Like that's one of the things I would recommend is always keep your exploit to yourself, because you don't, it's the internet, you don't know what you're dealing with. So, protect yourself in that instance, keep the exploit to yourself and know how you can identify the software or the payload. So having something where you can, request a specific endpoint and it's going to give you a response back that and not just the status code. For instance, like requesting a response and getting a 200 back. You want to know it returns a 200 or a 302 and these specific characters, or something that you can identify it by every time. And that makes my life a lot easier because I just essentially then put these things into, it can either be a nuclei template or something with my own code and scan for them. So being able to identify the software across anything else is really important. And, in that sense, I'm a big believer in you've got to protect yourself in that sense. So don't share your exploit code with someone that offers the scan. Wait till you get the results, and then only if you need to share it, then share it with them, whether it's through inviting them to a report or something else.
You mentioned here that you sometimes use the nuclei template, sometimes your own code. What's your own code and what it does differently from nuclei?
So it's at the very start when I started out, I wasn't aware, but nuclei existed. So I had really written my own scanning engine that would essentially just take templates in a very different format. It was I started out using Python, and I would have Python submodules that would plug in and be used for scanning there. So I've since ported this over to Golang, but it's just, identifying really simple things, whereas, it could be a status code and something within the HTML body. It's the same principle, but it's, hard coding a module that does it rather than, a YAML-based template. So same principle. Often or not, I would use nuclei these days because it's a lot more flexible.
Okay. Has there been a case where you collaborated like this with more than one person?
As in there's been two people that's came with like the same bug, or that like to a team. That for me,
yeah, for example,
yeah. So there's a few bugs that I've had that's been a team of two people that have came to me, and then we will essentially just do the same thing, same process. So they've found the bug together and they're interested in scanning. I'll scan and see if we can find any valid targets, and it's the same process. We often just split it. It's either 33%, write down the thirds, or sometimes I'll say, well, you guys can take the larger share and I'll take some less. It depends on the situation.
What's the most profitable bug that you've scaled?
So for me, there's the Swagger cross-site scripting. Before it was made public, I had a friend that was aware of it, and we essentially were scanning this for maybe a couple of months before the public proof of concept dropped, but we had no idea how widespread it was at the time. So we made a good chunk together from this, and then it got released and we realised there was a lot more that we probably should have been scanning for and a lot more things. So we were a bit gutted on that, but there was a good chunk made from that. And subdomain takeover is probably the main source of the income that I make, and cross-site scripting as well.
Do you have approximation of how many reports that were for the Swagger XSS?
If I was to approximate, we probably had, I think, probably close to 30, 40 reports or something like that within the 2-month period we're doing it. And then I can't remember the name of the person that dropped the public proof of concept.
David.
Yeah. After that, we were just like, we were seeing reports all the time. So, we were going from not getting very many duplicates at all to, getting duplicates on stuff that we're reporting. So, I mean, I hadn't fully automated it. We were just scanning every 3-4 days to see what had changed and see if we got anything coming through. And then once the public POC released, we've seen a huge increase in duplicates.
So normally you scan it more often than every 3 or 4 days?
Yeah. So it just consistently goes on a loop. For example, so it'll just run. I think probably most of my services run 3-4 times a day, whether that's subdomain resolving or vulnerability scanning, for example, and that's just the way it works. For the Swagger, it required an element of DOM. So you couldn't just use you could identify Swagger instances, but we were just trying to automate the exploitation units. So it had an element of DOM, so you need to use like a headless browser or version of Nuclei, which is extremely slow. So I didn't want to automate it to that point. What we were doing is we were just detecting all the Swagger instances just through a normal HTTP connection, and then bringing them in and then manually validating them with like a headless browser template on our local machines, and then just reporting them from there. So I hadn't quite automated it, but I wish I did at the time. Looking back.
Yes. So none of your automations uses the headless browser?
Not at the moment, but it's something I'm investigating because it's a big differentiator. It's really slow, but if it doesn't matter, if I'm coming to the realization it doesn't matter if it provides like additional things.
Okay. And has there been a bug which you thought is great but didn't actually monetize well?
It's again, it's relating back to some of the WordPress stuff. I mean, some of the things you find on plugins, and you get a bit excited about it, and then you get hits all across these different companies, and you think, oh, this is going to be great, we're going to get a good payout, and then it comes down to people saying, well, this is WordPress, we don't want to pay for it, or there's different things, and that's great, and pretty much every time a new 0 day drops, I think probably the last one was the Grafana local file inclusion. I was super excited about that because I felt like I was one of the first people to get in on it. And, by the time you get your reports triaged and it ends up being a duplicate, for example, and you're missing out by small report numbers. So it's really competitive. I've learned not to get too excited whenever a new 0 day drops because, it's just so much duplicates when you think you're going to be making a good chunk of money.
How did you manage to be one of the first person with the Grafana exploit? Where did you find the exploit?
So when it was known that it was public, I had a few friends that were going and, reverse engineering, looking for it at the time. So they heard that there was a local file inclusion, and a few different friends were looking at it. So one of my friends friends had managed to find it and sent it to us for, scanning. And I thought it was going to be one of the first, but I think there was a lot bigger automators at the time that were just swept up absolutely everything that was out there.
Yeah, so I see a lot of your bugs are due to the relationships and collaborations.
Yeah,
really good point for people to be open and to collaborate with others. If there are some people that don't have friends from real life that do bug bounty, they are just on Twitter following other creators, how do you think those people can create those relationships?
I think for me a big part of it is none of my friends that I know from life, like out with the internet, are interested in cybersecurity or bug bounty or anything remotely. For me, it's joining different Discord servers, whether that be the Bug Crowd server or different things, and building relationships slowly. So talking to people about things and asking the right questions. No one's going to give you all the answers, but if you can ask the right questions, you often get people reaching out to you privately and willing to help you out if they know you're going in the right direction and willing to learn. So it's a long process, but don't be scared to speak to people and just always approach them in the right way. Don't expect them to give you answers, but treat them like, if someone was asking you a question, how you'd like to be treated, and that's probably the best way to start something. Some of the best sort of relationships I've had was me reaching out to people that were doing a hell of a lot better than me, and kind of building that up over time by not just trying to be a leech and get all the information out of them, but ask them questions and speaking about things other than bug bounty. So actual friendships rather than just trying to leech stuff.
Yeah, that's a really good takeaway. How much time approximately do you spend per week on bug bounty?
For me, probably a good chunk. I would say probably 30-ish hours a week. I do work full time, but there's kind of a lot of time where I'll be doing after work for hours and hours, and a lot of it's just maintenance. And I have a few other things going on just now which are bug bounty related, but not necessarily leading to actively reporting things. But everything I do out with work is pretty much bug bounty. So most nights you'll see me, or most mornings before I start, will be either reporting things or making changes to code or making sure things aren't broken, which often are. So a good chunk of time, but it's not like what work or anything like that. It's more like an addiction. Like I enjoy it. It's really fun. So that's the big part for me.
So what's your typical day?
I usually wake up probably around 8:30, 9, and I'll probably spend about an hour going through automated alerts and just trying to figure out what I need to report for the day. Usually go and grab a coffee and then come back, type up some reports before I start work. So a lot of my people from my work are from LA, so the time difference is huge. It's like 8-9 hours. So I'll try and work from like 11 till 6ish time, and get everything done that I need done then. Go and get some dinner, and then just pretty much sit on the laptop, whether it's watching some telly at the same time or doing anything. Go and do some work for till 11, 12, and head off to bed sometimes. So it's a lot of time on the laptop, but it's the things that interest me and making sure things are maintaining and ticking over.
Are you considering going full-time on bug bounty?
It's been something that I've considered for a while. It's for me, I really like the flexibility of it. But with my job that I've got just now, I've got zero complaints. They're really flexible. They know I do bug bounty, and I'm happy with where I'm at just now. But it's always one of the things at the back of my head. I think it'd be great just to get up and do bug bounty and do it for wherever you need to be and stuff like that. So it's been something I've considered. I just don't think the stability is there for me quite yet.
Yeah, and I also saw you're releasing the platform for other people. How does that work?
Yeah, so I've been building the automation for about close to probably a year, 2 years now. And I had this concept through a lot of the collaborations I've done with people that, whether they might be able to access some of the information and use it within their hunting. So, the recon runs 3-4 times a day, resolves everything. And the idea is presenting all this information within a platform that people can actively search. So if you want to get a list of subdomains for your target, you can go on, sign up for free, search and get a result, and it'll return, the subdomains, the associated services, the HTTP headers, all that stuff. So really it's just through the collaborations and the people that are asking to scan things, it's just a way to try and enable people to, be able to do their own recon specific to a bug bounty program. So it's kind of been working on the web UI with some people for probably a year now. And we just decided, we were trying to provide like an enterprise level solution where, companies could sign up and get things there. But trying to get into companies and get things going on that is a lot slower than what we expected. So, in the meantime, we're releasing something for people to be able to use within the community and hopefully help them hacking. I think there's been kind of one success story on Twitter already of something that was found that they hadn't previously. So that for me is more rewarding than anything else.
Where can people go if they want to try it out?
So it's if you go to overcash-security.com and you click on for white hats, you will see there is a search engine very similar to Shodan in appearance, and that's on purpose, so people can understand it and use it familiarly. And the whole concept is you can search a root domain. So, for example, hacker1.com, and it'll return all the subdomains and the services and the ports that are open for that particular program. And if we don't, have an index domain, we will go out and fetch it for you with, all the recon data and send you an email when we have the data. So that's the core concept.
Perfect. My last question, what are you looking forward to achieve in 2023?
So I think when we were having our conversation, I think it's probably on both of us is to try and get to a live hacking event. It's something I want to do. I see my friends going all the time, and it's it's something that I would like to go and experience, especially somewhere sunny, hopefully, and continuing just to go bug bounty. So for me, it's all about growth and moving forward. So it's try and beat previous year and keep moving. And for me, it's focusing a lot more on trying to grow a community for Overcast and trying to get enterprise clients on board. So they're the things that I'm most looking interested to.
Yeah, so platforms, our handles are in the description.
Yeah.
send us some invites. Thank you so much for joining me in the podcast. It was, for me, super interesting, especially that I foresee that for me, it's the best way to get the best return on investment, to look for those 0 days and work with people like you to to scale them. So I'm super interested in this. If people want to follow you and find out more about you, where are you in social media? What's your handle?
Mikey96_BH, and that's on Twitter. Sorry.
Yeah, we'll link this also in the description. Once again, thank you for joining me.
Amazing, thank you. It's been a pleasure and really enjoyable. Thanks for having me.
If you're wondering why am I in this strange studio with quite a bad lighting, it's because I started my digital nomad journey and I'm at the moment on Canary Islands, or in Tenerife to be more specific. If you want to see more of how it goes and how do I even work remotely, follow me on Instagram. And if you enjoyed this episode of the podcast, check out this one that's on your screen at the moment, where I interview Johan Carlson, whose hacking style is the completely opposite to what Michael does. For now, thank you for watching and goodbye.